welcome to Kankakee Podcast, where we talk about the people and places of Kankakee County. I'm Jake LaMore, and this episode I'm very, very excited about because this is a man that I consider to be a legend in the area, and whether he agrees to it or not, especially since just this last year, he was brought into the National Association of Farm Broadcasters, which is a very big deal. He was just inducted into their Hall of Fame, and that is Mr. Mike Perrine. Welcome.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you and your audience.
Yeah, it's just I've been excited for this day. I was hoping we could make this happen one day.
Well, I really appreciated your invitation, Jake, although I think you are being way too kind when you mention legend.
No.
You and I have known each other and worked at the radio station together and still do on occasion. And so we've known our backgrounds, both of us, but I've been in farm broadcasting since 1969 and in radio overall since 1959. So I've been at it a while.
Man, there's just so much to unpack there. I guess starting with, where were you born?
Born in Quincy, Illinois, actually. My parents lived in Pittsfield, Illinois, in Pike County. And for the audience that wouldn't know, that would be west of Springfield, probably, maybe an hour and 15 minutes. And little town, Pike County, Illinois. And went to school there, moved around some with my folks, but graduated from high school there and started my senior year in high school, which was 1959. Started then in radio, won the local disc jockey contest at our high school, and then went on to the radio station. And they asked me if I would consider getting out of the contest because there were several schools involved. And then if I wanted to drop my entry into it, then go to work for them part-time. So I did. And that's how it all started.
So they liked you so much that they're like, hey, get out of this contest, drop out, and then we'll just hire you.
That's exactly what happened. And at that time, during high school, I actually worked as much as I went to school. And we didn't call it the same thing that is now available for students where they can work. But as long as it was all legit, you could do it. And I worked for a grain and livestock trucker and drove a straight truck, hauled hay, scooped corn, all of that type of thing. And then during the summer when I went to work for the radio station, I had to, of course, drop out of doing the other work. And one thing that your audience might approve of or not approve of, but I asked my boss, who I really liked with the livestock group and the trucking company, and I said, what do I do? I said, I thought after I graduated, I'd just go to work for you, and that's what we do. He said, I want to tell you something. If you can make a living with your brain and your mouth instead of your back and your butt, do it. So with his blessing, that's what I did. And I've been talking ever since.
Oh, my gosh. I love that. Did he really say that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I didn't make it up. Nope.
That's pretty wise. That's pretty wise of him.
It was. And, and really, I had definitely planned on staying there. My dad had already moved to Texas my senior year. And Mom and I were going to go on Labor Day of '59, but I had already about decided that I was going to stay, and I had grandparents there and a lot of relatives in Pittsfield, and stay and work for the livestock trucker. But things changed, and we moved to Texas. I went to work. My dad was able to get me a job with a radio station there. I worked night radio. It was kind of interesting. Now, you've been around the broadcast business a while.
Yeah.
You know how the trial period goes?
Yes.
The boss, I think my dad probably hammered him a little bit, and he really didn't want to hire me because it was an adult radio station. I was 17 years old, and but he finally agreed, and I had to go to work I think I had to be there at 6 in the morning. I don't remember if it was 5 or 6, honestly, and worked for 1 hour. be on the board for 1 hour. We call it a board op now, but
Yes.
we didn't call it that then. And that was it, for no pay. Wasn't getting paid at all. It was just a trial thing, see how you do. And I don't remember if it was either 2 weeks or a month that I had to do that. And I passed it and went to work for them then. They hired me. And then I was on night radio from 6 in the evening until 1 in the morning for about a year and a half before we moved back to Illinois.
So were you on mic at that time, or were you just running whatever programs?
We carried NBC Network.
Okay.
And so some of that, and then play a record or two, but really didn't talk very much at all.
Okay.
And the next oldest staffer to me was been about 30 years old, so I was the kid, and learned a lot about music. As I said, it was an adult station. A lot of Sinatra and Perry Como and big bands and so forth and so on, and some jazz, and really got a taste of what we'd term good music was, and enjoyed working there. In the meantime, I was still going to school, junior college. I think I went 3 days a week, if I remember right, but worked every night, 6 nights a week, had Sunday off, except when the boss wanted Sunday off because he took Sunday night, and he would call you about 3 in the afternoon. I can't make it tonight, so forth and so on. So after I'd married in the meantime a girl from Illinois, and we moved back there, of course. Anyway, on Sunday afternoon, we'd make it a point to be gone. And so if he called, too bad. I didn't.
Well, I wasn't there to answer the phone.
Right. And we didn't have cell phones. So.
No, yeah. And to kind of paint the picture too, you and I obviously realized like what radio was like at that time.
Right.
But to kind of paint the picture for anyone listening that's not very much aware, radio at that time, I'm assuming at that point it was just AM that you were working on,
yes.
right? It was AM radio.
Was.
A lot of times your stations that played, especially your smaller stations that played news, would also play music as well. It wasn't like this is a talk station, this is a news station. It was kind of usually a mix of
You're absolutely
everything.
correct.
Yeah.
And some stations would play a variety of music. You might hear some country songs. You might hear what we called rock and roll songs at that time, and then some good music along with it. Because as you are aware from your radio history, several of the artists, I saw a thing on TV the other day with Steve and Edie, and I think PBS was running it. And they were then going back to some of Steve Lawrence's pop songs that had been on, even though he sang a lot of traditional music as well.
Yeah.
And but yes, there weren't any talk things, not totally talk. And we got our commercials in. Those in your audience may or may not be aware when we talk about records, then we're talking about a big turntable that we put them on, and the arm came over here, and you're spinning the record and holding it and cueing it. So when you said, and now here's Jake LaMore with Sunny in the Morning, you took your hand off and the record started. Well, anyway, a lot of the commercials came in on vinyl disc, just like that. And the radio station in Texas actually had a machine that you could make a record. And so we did. In fact, I made a record one night when before we got married, my wife was in Illinois, or future wife in Illinois, and I was in Texas. So the engineer at the station was a good buddy. So he ran the machine. So I sent her a letter on this disc. And we played it a lot of times over the years. Unfortunately, it got broken. Probably a good thing. Sounded kind of corny later, but at that time it didn't.
How cool, though. I would have loved to listen to that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'd have probably been embarrassed now.
Still, that's really cool.
But everything, and I'm not saying good or bad. I'm just saying everything was different then.
Oh, yeah. And at that point, you weren't running tape yet. It was just like two turntables that you'd switch back and forth.
We did have the real machines.
Okay.
But But yes, there were no cassettes, no cartridges. I know on occasion I would tape with the big reels, maybe an hour, and then if I didn't want to work too hard, a month and a half from now, play that particular tape in another hour. And so once in a while, we all did that. But no, there was no taped commercials. We just didn't have them.
So when did you get your chance to finally be on the air, like behind a mic?
Well, in Pittsfield when I started in junior high.
So you were
senior high.
So you were on the mic in Pittsfield then.
The contest, you were on the air for 45 minutes, Monday through Friday for 1 week, and you were not spinning the records, but you were in another studio, talking and reading some commercials because the radio station sold it, and so you were the disc jockey, and you could pick out some of the songs that you wanted to play and that type of thing. But no, it was from day number one, I was behind the mic.
Okay. So when you started working at that station in Texas, what came after that?
We stayed there for a year and a half, 2 years. Came back to Illinois. There was a radio station, WRMS. It is now. I don't know if that's. Let me get my wires straight here. No, that's not right. There was a station that was going to be built in Bloomington, Illinois, and I was supposed to go to work for them. So we moved back to Illinois, stayed with my aunt and uncle, or Betty's aunt and uncle, and the FCC delay on approval for the radio station just kept dragging and dragging and dragging. Well, in the meantime, I helped out during the summer, this old boss that I worked for trucking, and we had one child at that point, and so we needed some money. My wife had lacked 1 year of being a registered nurse in Quincy at Blessed Illinois Hospital. One of the people that she had taken care of was a man by the name of Harold Kirsch. He was a salesman for WGEM radio. How in the world he remembered her after 2.5, 3 years, I don't know. But he seemed to remember that she had told him she was engaged to somebody in radio. Somehow they found us, he did, at my wife's aunt's house in Griggsville, Illinois. I went over for an interview. He didn't hire me, but I was hired for night radio in Quincy. And so I did that I started to work there in 62, stayed until the June of 64. So I was on night radio for maybe a year, something like that. And they also had a TV station. And so I got moved up into what they call director switcher, behind the scenes and pushing the buttons that put everything on.
And, for the TV station?
Yes, sir.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And we had, if something messed up, it was my fault because it was. But we had a lot of engineers that controlled a lot of things, and they saved my bacon several times because they could anticipate what was going to happen. And you were supposed to say, stand by, camera to one, hit it, all that kind of stuff, like a director and all that.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'd forget, but they were really good to work with. So I did that, and until June of 1964, and I had a chance to go back to Pittsfield to the WBBA radio, and as program director, and which wasn't a big deal, but program director. And I still had relatives over there. And
you say it wasn't a big deal because it was a small station?
It was a small station. There weren't very many of us there.
Okay.
And but we did, and it worked. And I started local news at that time, and there's some stations still do. They call their local news the obits or a swap and shop or whatever it might be. Well, to me, local news is local news. And when I had been at WGEM in Quincy, I had gotten involved in newscasts and covering news and all that, and writing stories and all that. And so I said, we ought to be doing some things here. So we did. It was up to me to do it, but we did it. And then later in 66, I believe, we added an FM station, a new FM station. And I was still there for about another, maybe 6 months. The boss and I got crossways. And, of course, I was still pretty young, thought I knew it all. And
why did you guys get crossways?
I disagreed on staff.
Oh.
And I thought I needed all the authority, and I wanted him to back me up on everything, and he wouldn't do it. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, I'm gone. Yeah. And but anyway, then moved around a little bit and wound up at WLDS in Jacksonville in 1967, January of 67, and as an area salesman. And then I was also a DJ one afternoon a week for 4 hours, and it was strictly AM at that time too. And then I did local news on the weekends. You did it all. And then they added an FM, and I did a little bit on that, but eventually the sales staff at that time was not very enthused about FM.
And FM was like the enemy at that time.
It was. And we had the AM, WLDS AM, is 1180, 1,000 watts, daytimer. But it covers west central Illinois. And so he then hired another gentleman to be the salesman for FM. And it went well. It did very well. But then I started the farm department in 1969, and then sales and everything along with it, because I've always sold advertising along with farm broadcasting. To me, one goes with the other.
Yeah.
So it's worked out pretty good.
Yeah, I would say so. And did you have the interest in getting into farm broadcasting, or was the opportunity just there? You're like, no one else is doing this right now, so let's do it?
That's a good question. I don't know that I had an interest. I wasn't raised on a farm. I had a lot of relatives. My grandparents farmed, and when I was a lot younger, I stayed out their house in the summer and a lot of times during the year, and I helped them when I got old enough to do anything. So I had, an interest in it. But you got to keep in mind back then that, as you and I have mentioned before, things were entirely different then than they are now. The local extension advisor, like here we have a unit extension advisor, or unit leader as they call it now, for Grundy, Kankakee, and Will County, one deal. Back then, most of the counties had their own extension office. There was a gentleman whose name was Ed Garlick, had a program once a week on the radio station. And he came up with a name which I've always liked, but I never did use it, but I always liked it. Across the Fields and Furrows. That was his deal.
I like that.
And I do too.
Yeah.
And it says it.
Yeah.
And so his health was getting bad, and it might have been on maybe more than once a week, but not very much. And it was on during the noon hour. So the station was looking at something to fill, and what are we going to do there? I was again area salesman. So I was handling some area ag accounts, farm elevators, all of that. And I don't know if you're familiar with the name Harvest Store, but some of your listeners or viewers might be, the Big Blue Silo. And they were very popular several years ago. I don't know about now, but they were then. And they had an office in Jacksonville and did a little advertising with me. And their manager said, I'm going to take a group of pork producers to Canada. Would you like to go along? I didn't have a tape recorder or anything, And I said, well, I guess. He said, I'll pay the expenses if you want to do a few interviews with them. So I talked to my boss, And he said, yeah. He said, if it's not going to cost us anything. And he said, then if you can do some interviews, he said, we can put it in this slot where this other gentleman was not regular. And so that's how actually it started. And then back, I'm not going to give you an exact date, so anyone in your audience, do not hold me to this. I'm probably wrong. But the oil embargo was maybe 1970. I think it was 70, but it might be in another year. And again, I told you earlier, the radio station was daytime. And so in the wintertime, it wouldn't sign on until later. And we were losing revenue. And the only reason I mentioned the oil embargo, that's when all this was taking place. And so how are we going to make up this revenue? Because we're losing morning programming. And I said, well, maybe we could do something of an evening. So then I started a program called Farm Final, which is still on the radio station. It's an entirely different show now, but we won't get into that. And
but it's still there.
The name is still there, yes.
See, that's cool.
And going back since 1970.
Yeah, that's amazing to say that that's still there, even if it's changed.
But we started if I'm out and about and I'll interview somebody, or I saw Jake LaMore and he and his boy were out baling hay today, and just stuff like that. And it went over, and it was very short, maybe 5 minutes, maybe. And then I wanted to add a market cast, so we got a market reporter and lengthened the program, and we got more sponsors. And so when I ended it, it ran from 5:05 to 5:30 every evening, starting out at 5 o'clock, and then, it started out at 5 minutes and ran 25. But it's not that way now, I don't think. But regardless, it worked very well. And then I hired another gentleman who was a disc jockey, but with a farm background. I started covering a lot of meetings, Jake, and agriculture meetings, maybe annual meetings, major events, Farm Progress Show, different ones. Well, when I do interviews and do reports, send them back to the radio station, somebody had to be there to take them. And so I told the boss I need some help. And he said, anybody here? Yes. So I got an assistant. His name is Mike Adams, who is now just retired. And he went on to achieve more than I ever did. He's very sharp. I was very lucky. And a good friend and a very good worker. And anyway, then the two of us, we owned West Central Illinois and farm programming. We really did. Now that sounds like brag, but Dizzy Dean used to say it ain't bragging if it's fact. So.
Yeah, because so at that point, it was just at that station.
Yeah.
But you were doing so well. Is that when you started to branch? When did you start to branch out?
I stayed there until 81. I went across, then I became national sales manager, and Mike moved up to farm director. Then I went across the street and started in competition, farm director again on another station. And in 87, I went to work for Tribune Radio Networks and WGN Radio, working with Max Armstrong and Orion Samuelson. I started there. No, I didn't start it. I expanded their Tribune Radio Network affiliates in Indiana. Moved to Indiana. After about a year, had the opportunity to come back to Jacksonville, which by then it was home because we'd been there 20 years, and became general manager of WJIL Radio, where I had been farm director, and did that, and for 3 years, I guess. Then we moved to Wisconsin for about 2 years, and now bringing more up to date, I came to Kankakee in 1995.
And how did Kankakee come about?
Well, I knew Gary Wright, the general manager, and Marla Behrens, who was the farm director at that time. We wanted to get back to Illinois. All our kids were grown and gone, but my wife didn't like Wisconsin. We were in the Madison area. I was I was general manager of a station, but it's one of these stations that somebody has to be general manager, and it was me. It wasn't a big deal. And so I started farm programming there, and to make the owners a little money because we weren't making it otherwise. And then the station eventually sold, and I was looking. The new owners did keep me as farm director, but we still wanted back to Illinois. And I don't know how I came across or got acquainted with Gary Wright. I knew him and came over here, was interviewed, and took the job. Marla had left. I started to work here in April of 95, and I think she left here and went to Bloomington to WJBC in probably January of that year. So they had 3 or 4 months with no farm director. And so when I came here, I assumed the advertising accounts that she had and then the farm programs, but I did everything a lot different than she did. And I pushed sales much harder. And it grew and it grew and it grew. And we started the Early Bird Farm Report. In fact, I've used it about everywhere. I had started it again at WLDS in Jacksonville.
Okay.
So that name, and I've never had it, what do you want to say, copyrighted or patented?
Yeah.
But I've never heard of it anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, if somebody else uses it, too bad. I'm going to keep it.
Yeah.
But anyway, started that and just did what I thought a farm broadcaster ought to do. When things started changing, the ownership of WKAN started changing in 2003. I figured it was time to be looking for something else. And Mike Adams, that I mentioned to you, had been my assistant before. He was the host of the AgriTalk Radio Network, which did cover a lot of states. And they needed someone to help in sales and also to work with their affiliate stations. He recommended me, and we got together, and it worked out very well. So we moved down to Troy, Illinois, which is where I live now, north of St. Louis, about 20 miles. And our office, studios and everything, was in St. Louis. And so, it was there until it sold. Doan owned it. Some of your audience may be aware of Doan Agricultural Services. They owned AgriTalk at that time. They later sold it to Vance Publishing. Vance Publishing sold it to the Farm Journal organization December of 2012. At that point, the new owners didn't need me. I didn't need them. And people said, well, you're going to retire? What are you going to do? I said, what will I do if I retire? And so I knew there was still a lot of contacts up here, and because I had stayed in touch, even though it had been gone a few years. And I thought I would just kind of be a national sales rep. I did not intend to get back into farm broadcasting. And the National Farm Machinery Show in Louisville, which I used to cover for years. I don't anymore, but I did for several. I told my wife, I said, I need to cover that or go down there because when you leave a job, as you well know, many times people don't know where you went.
Yes.
They have no idea what happened to you. And I said, a lot of the advertisers that we dealt with AgriTalk don't know what happened to me, and maybe I can get some business. So I figured out what it was going to cost me to go. And I thought, and you start a new business, you're on a shoestring.
Yep.
And my wife, who was a good supporter and a good partner, she said, I agree you need to do something. But she said, if we make a little money, fine, but we don't want it to cost us anything. I said, understand that. So I lined up. I don't think Milner's were in it. In fact, I know they weren't. I contacted a few radio stations that I knew and said, hey, I'm going to be going down there and do some reports. If you'd like to carry them, blah, 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 blah. And the sponsor will be whatever. And they did. We wound up, I netted $100, but it didn't cost us anything. And,
but you covered your expenses and you made $100.
That's right, made $100. And so that was the time then that I thought, all right. So I started then, came out here and talked to Tim Milner, and who was always, even though we were competitors when I was at KEN, he was always very complimentary, very complimentary.
Yes, and, Tim's always been great about that.
Yep, he has. And so he said, if you'd like to go to work for us and do some selling and so forth. So we had that agreement. But I told him, and if he watches this anywhere along the line, he'll remember it. I said, if you're going to have agricultural advertisers, you have to have farm programming. There has to be something that makes a farmer want to listen other than music and local news, which is certainly the local news and weather and everything, which I think the Milner Group does an excellent job at, really do. And I'm not tooting the horn for them, but I do.
I agree.
Anyway, we started then the Early Bird Farm Report, which is aired on Saturday mornings. We started that in May of 2013, so about 6 months after I'd started my business, my company. And that was just once a week. And I got thinking, after a while, there's so much more going on here. I'm just I was still selling, but I'm just kind of twiddling my thumbs before Saturday, and I can't get it all on. I mean, there's much more information, and I've got that problem now even.
Right.
And, the more you go after it, the more there is.
I've got the same problem with podcasting.
Yep, exactly. I mean, there's a lot of people you want to talk to, and you've only got so much time or space.
Yep.
Anyway, I talked to them about doing the Early Bird Report then, and we started that in January of 15. So it's been on now 8 years, 9 years. And, of course, it's just 2 minutes, but it airs on the Valley once and then airs twice a day on River Country. And before we started the Early Bird, Mike Rubel, who is still there and did farm over the years also, and, of course, is still quite a very good salesman, a radio salesman. He really is, and has definite interest still in farm. But he was doing a program, so we decided to make a change, or I didn't make the change, the boss did, to kind of move that out of the way and put farm time, farm time as we call it now, not the Early Bird, farm time, because the Early Bird's Saturday. And we were wondering about a name to call this morning program. And my wife actually came up with it, and Farm Time with Mike Perrine. I said, hey, that rhymes.
It does.
Why not? Or it sings, as that one in the Green Beret movie.
Yes,
he said it sings.
It sings.
So
yep,
it does.
It does sing.
And anyway, that's how that started. We've been very, very fortunate.
So, how many stations are you on now?
Just up here.
Just up here?
Yeah.
I thought you had.
Well, what you're probably thinking of, there's more to my company than just being on the air here.
Right.
On two major events now, Commodity Classic, which this coming year in 24, it will be in Houston in the end of February, 1st of March. Then Farm Progress Show, this rotates between Illinois and Iowa, and it'll be in Boone, Iowa again this next fall. I have a lady, I covered them for years, but I have a lady now. In fact, she was just named the Farm Broadcaster of the Year by our organization. Her name is Lori Boyer, and she lives in Colorado. She has done the Commodity Classic for me the last couple of years. I had some health issues at one time, and it was about the time my wife had passed away, and I thought I don't want it. And but let's call about facts for facts and economics. I had it sold, and I needed to keep that income coming in, and so I contacted her. She was agreeable. and did a very good job. And so then she did. After that, I could do it, but Jake, I'm not a kid anymore. And if I could get out of doing a ton of traveling, I do.
Yeah.
And so she's going to do it for me again this year, and I'll probably do Farm Progress myself. But to kind of tie all this in with your question,
Sure.
we have MP Ag Radio, which is my company. We have usually 23, 21, sometimes 25 radio stations in 6 or 7 states that carry these programs. So that's what you're probably thinking about.
The Commodity Classic.
Yes.
And, okay.
Two events out of the year.
That's where that comes into play.
And
okay.
Now, in addition, I also place advertising with several radio stations. There is a seed company in this area that advertises with us on the Milner stations, but I also place advertising for them on 5 or 6 other stations in Illinois. And I'm not really an advertising agency because the money didn't come to me. I was bonded, but I didn't want money coming in and paying the bills and all that. And I'm more of a rep than I am an agency. And but that's worked out very well. And that pretty well sums up what I do.
Yeah.
And I don't work hard. I am semi-retired. Here lately, it seems like it has really been busy. And prior to the Hall of Fame ceremonies over in Kansas City, when I was going to be gone like 3 days, it's a little hairy. Just like if you're going to be gone and you got to book your programs and get them lined up, that's just the way it is. But if you have an assistant, which I don't, I'm a one-man band, then the assistant, you can say, okay, I'm getting out of here. You do it, boy. But I don't have that luxury.
Like you would never guess, I feel like, that you're not a farmer just because you seem to know the industry so well.
The main thing, and again, this isn't trying to be smart. I'm gonna use a couple of little quotes that I've heard before. I don't know all the answers, but I've heard half the questions, and that's part of it. And I have always been smart enough to know what I didn't know. That's a key, I think. And also, I don't know anything, and I'd ask you earlier coming in here today about your podcast. If you and I were going to do an interview and I didn't know anything about your business or enough just to, kind of warm and fuzzy, then I'd say before we ever started, give me some talking points. Tell me what we ought to be talking about here. And I still do that. We used to do it when I was with AgriTalk. A lot of times with Mike Adams did most of the interviews. I'd do occasionally some. But don't hesitate to give me your talking points. And so we did. And but a general background. I never was an investigative reporter. And I keep up on stuff.
Yes, you do.
We get a lot of, we got a lot of news releases, which a lot of them you just automatically delete, but that's all right. And I take Prairie Farmer magazine. I get Farm Week magazine and Farm Week Now, which is every day with good news. And there's another gentleman here in the States, Stu Ellis, that has a newsletter every week, and he works I'll keep it clean on the air. Let's just say he works very hard to put that together and a lot of information. And I'll call him and say, hey, Stu, I'm going to use this, this, and this. And another thing, too, the RFD Radio Network, and I've got good friends with them, but they put out some audio, and I believe that's one thing we haven't gotten into yet. But if I use a part of it, I will always give them credit. I believe in giving credit. If I'm going to use some of your material, then I'm going to let our audience know that's where it came from. I think that's only fair.
Oh, absolutely.
And,
Yeah.
One thing that I have hung my hat on, and that's a phrase I have used many times, is doing interviews. When I first started in Jacksonville, again, by then it would have been in the early mid-'70s, Growmark FS annual meeting in Chicago. At that time, it was like a 3-day meeting. It's not now, but I covered that for several years. I met a gentleman by the name of Dave Sylvester. He worked for a station in Fort Dodge, Iowa. And we got acquainted. And I never had any formal training as far as getting into farm broadcasting. The 1 year in junior college, speech, English, dramatics, but nothing about farm. Anyway, all he did was interviews. He told me, he said, people may not always agree with the person you're interviewing, but they want to hear what he has to say, or she, whatever the case might be. Although at that time it was mostly men. Anymore, you have so many more women involved in agriculture and in management positions and so forth. But then it was mostly men. And but I never forgot it, and always did that. In fact, when I gave my Hall of Fame acceptance speech about 3 weeks ago, I mentioned him and gave him credit because he really started me down the right road, and I enjoy interviewing. When I first started in radio and doing some selling, I called like on any other salesman, the mom and pop stores and the dime stores at that time, a lot of them, and anymore it's all agriculture. The only non-agricultural account I have with Milner Media is Scanlon Collision Specialist, and in fact they're even doing some farm. But as far as being like a grain elevator or fertilizer, no.
Right. Yeah, they're not a fertilizer company. They're not a seed company.
Nope.
They don't sell implements.
Nope. And that's the only one that I have that isn't really directly farm.
Yeah.
And but it's been. I always thought the phrase "a good ride" was a little overdone, but looking back over it, I'm going to say it's worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
Because I've been in it a long time, and I'm closer to the end than I am at the beginning.
Yeah.
And I did see that quote somewhere, and I liked it. So I don't know who said it, but I do like it. And it's true.
It's true. That's a good quote, though. And see, I didn't realize that MP Ag Radio was only started around 2013 or so.
Yeah.
I did not realize that because I started working for Milner in 2014. So it wasn't that long after that.
Right.
For some reason, I thought your company was older than that.
No, it's I really didn't know what I was going to call it.
Yeah.
Had no idea what I was going to call it. And I don't remember for sure, but I'm sure my wife had some suggestions, but I honestly don't remember. I remember the farm time bit that was hers, but I don't remember our company name.
Yeah.
And I have a daughter-in-law that is an attorney, and she helped me get lined up with a lot of stuff to actually form the company. And at one time it was MP Ag Incorporated. Anymore it's not. It's just MP Ag Radio. And, but, like I said, since January of 13, that's when it started.
Yeah.
And really, I use the word I've been fortunate. A lot of people would use the word I've been blessed. And I really have. Like any other, family, we've had some deaths and we've had illnesses and ups and downs, but I still enjoy what I do, and I think that's a key. You come from a bunch of hard workers in your background, and my dad told me years and years ago, and he was a salesman. He sold a lot of different things, but he was very successful. And he said, I don't care. He said, I want you to go to college at least 1 year. After that, it's up to you. But he said, I don't care if you dig ditches back then, which I don't know if anybody would say that now or not, but he did then. He said, I don't care if you dig ditches, as long as that's what you want to do. He said, it has to be something you want to do. I'm not going to force you into anything. And he certainly didn't. And I still enjoy it. It's like any other job. You get a little tired of it once in a while. But to me, a good interview and a good sale, a good advertising sale, rate the same satisfaction because I enjoy both. And I've always tried to be the same. If one of the phrases I've always used and I believe in, you got to get out and get your hands dirty. And so I like to get out in the field and talk to the farmers. And but I try to be the same whether I'm in jeans or whether I'm in a suit. Although we don't wear suits too much anymore.
I was going to say, probably don't put those suits on too much. No, we don't.
I put one on for a Hall of Fame deal. That's the first time I'd worn a suit and a tie in a long time.
I will just say, just to kind of end it with just saying thank you for doing this and thank you for, continuing to represent the agriculture community in Kankakee County and reminding people that aren't involved in agriculture, reminding them that, hey, this is happening in your backyard right now. And just, it's good. It's good to have someone represent.
Well, I appreciate your comments, Jake. And again, you and I are good friends and work together on the radio occasionally. One thing I would mention, when you said something just kind of struck a chord with me. Several years ago, and certainly when I started in farm broadcasting, but also I remember Orion on GN and others, we were talking to the farm audience. That's all we were talking to. Then it evolved into, as you just said, talking to everybody. And of course, now during Ag Month in March, we stress the importance of agriculture to the non-farming public. And so from that's been a big change. And in our farm time programs, a lot of it is directed certainly to the farmer. But on the other hand, there are things that I try to work in recently about the change in the school lunch program with milk, where they are now allowing 2% milk and whole milk both, and things for the consumer that affect all of us. And, it's we're all, I know, again, this sounds like a cliche, but we're all in this thing together. We are. A line that I don't know who came up with it, but somebody did. We all breathe the same air, and we do. And without farmers, we don't eat. It's that simple. Now, some people forget it. There's a big concern anymore about foreign land buyers buying Chinese and others buying up a lot of farmland throughout the country. But if you would look back 20 years ago, that same question was there too. People were saying, oh, foreign buyers. Well, I'm not trying to make fun of it or anything, but it is true that everything goes around, comes around. I had an interview that I taped several years ago with the late Earl Butz, who was the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture at that time. I played that interview maybe 2 years ago. Jake, the same things he was talking about then I could have done that interview with him yesterday. So a lot of things never change.
Yeah.
Certainly some do, but...
and that's good and bad.
Yeah, you're right.
Like you're listening to this and you're like, wow, this is still an issue?
Mm-hmm.
And this is, however many years ago, it kind of makes you sad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I've enjoyed being on the air with you and I thank you again for the opportunity. I'll try to continue to live up to the pedestal that you have me on, and we'll go from there. I hope everybody has a good 2024.
Oh, thank you, Mike. I really appreciate it. That concludes this episode of Kankakee Podcast. I'm Jake LaMore. Thank you so much for listening. Please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and follow us on social media at Kankakee Podcast. And special thank you to our Patreon subscriber, Teague Dreenan, for supporting the show each month. Join at patreon.com/Kankakee Podcast, and you too could hear your name on a future episode. Kankakee Podcast is owned and produced by the fine team at Pathfinder, a full-service marketing agency in Kankakee, Illinois. Learn more at yourpathfinder.io. Our theme song is by Lupe Carroll.
This river